Hello, and welcome to this celebration of the Centre for Psychedelic Research at Imperial College London. My name is David Nutt. I'm a professor of neuropsychopharmacology here and also a psychiatrist. And it's a great pleasure to welcome 98 of you so far to this special occasion. And we're doing it today for four reasons. The first is to thank our founders and donors. And I want to say specific thanks to four of the founder members of the centre who are actually with us live today. And that's Bodhana Thomas, Sanjay Singhal, Shamil Chandaria, and Anton Bilton. Obviously, without your support, we wouldn't have a centre at all. Of course, the centre's been going for a number of years, founded by Robin. And the second reason for meeting with you all today is to celebrate the foundation and the considerable achievements that the centre has made in that short time. The third reason is to congratulate Robin on not just his achievements here, but also his success in getting a personal chair in University of California, San Francisco, and to wish him well for his future adventures on the other side of the pond. And then finally, the fourth reason is to share with you the vision for the future of the centre without him. And the good news is that Imperial College are committed to the centre. I'm going to step up as centre director, having been deputy director for some time. And we will share at the end with you our vision of how the centre will continue to go prosper despite Robin's leaving. So those are the purpose of today. We will share with you data and ideas. If you have questions, can you please put them into the Q&A, which you'll see at the bottom right of your screen. Type your questions in there, and at the end, we'll do our best to answer them. I'll direct the questions to whichever of the four speakers is best positioned to answer them. I hope you enjoy the introductory music, and that was from a group called East Forest, who've made a lot of the background music for our therapy sessions with psilocybin, and you can see how impressive it is. And it's another example of how the centre is bringing multimodal inputs into science, working with music producers as well as neuroscientists and clinicians, etc. So I'm now going to ask Robin to do his presentation on the past and the present. So over to you, Robin.
Thank you, David. Well, really pleased to be with you all. I hope you can see my slides here. It's very satisfying to be able to present to you on the achievements of the centre over the last 2 years. I'll be speaking for about 15 minutes before passing over to one of our stars, Meg Spriggs, who will tell you about our anorexia trial that's just begun, very excitingly. And then we'll go back to David and over to David Erritzoe to hear about some really exciting developments for the centre going forwards into the future. So now it's not a competition, but if it was, we've done quite well. So we were the first in the world to found a dedicated centre, named centre, for the purpose of psychedelic research. We did that in April 2019. And since then, gosh, it could be as many as a dozen centres, I think, have popped up and currently riding this incredible wave of enthusiasm for psychedelic medicine and science. So it's great to have been in there early and to say that we were the first. We've also done pretty well with our citations. We have the highest citation rate in the field. Our first paper on our first trial looking at psilocybin for depression is actually top of the list. That was published in Lancet Psychiatry. So we do very well on an academic front. And that's consolidated in a sense by our recent publication in the highest impact medical scientific journal, the New England Journal of Medicine, which reported on our recent clinical trial comparing psilocybin therapy with a standard antidepressant intervention in people with depression. Now, in terms of real-world impact, changing people's lives, if you want, it's so satisfying to say that we've done that, albeit for a small number of people. People have told us sometimes we've saved their lives, or at least the medicine and the therapy has saved their lives. And so that really brings it home, the kind of impact that we're having for people with, say, severe depression. Often, tragically, depression is so tied up with suicide and so on. And so to give people a new sense of hope and purpose and meaning in their lives is what it's all about, really, and so deeply satisfying. And we've been able to create that change on an individual level, but also we've been able to communicate it to the masses. So our public engagement has been very good, I think. We recently had a double Oscar-winning production company, Grey Media, create a hour-long documentary for BBC Two. It's available on iPlayer still, the Psychedelic Drug Trial. And that covered our recent depression trial comparing psilocybin therapy for escitalopram. So do check that out if you haven't already. And it's this kind of public engagement that helps spread the word and really puts it into the public domain and public consciousness, and that really helps to move the needle along. And also we're seeing exciting things happening on in terms of the beginnings of what you might call infrastructure level changes. So medical development roadmaps towards the potential licensing of psilocybin therapy have been very much inspired by the research that we've done in the center. And policy changes, albeit it's very early, but in some progressive jurisdictions in the world, in North America in particular, we're starting to see policy changes. And again, they referenced our research when, for example, in the state of Oregon, having a democratic vote go in favor of legal regulated psilocybin therapy. And also in terms of commercial spin out with Imperial are a founding partner. We're developing an app, a mobile phone app, cell phone app, that's evolved and been inspired by the research that we've done at the center. So David, I think we'll show you a nice video of the center that we created with its launch. And in that, you'll hear that it was our mission to focus on three main domains: mental health, neuroscience, and social science. And so in the mental health domain, we have done a couple of depression trials, and most recently the one comparing psilocybin with an SSRI for depression. Meg will tell you about our current anorexia trial. In a sense, that's our current flagship trial. Very exciting to be doing that. We also have a trial looking at fibromyalgia syndrome, so a certain type of chronic pain. If we find signal in this trial, it will have implications for other types of chronic pain, like lower back pain, that often goes together with terrible suffering and disability, and often psychiatric comorbidity, depression, and so on. So again, if we can create some change there, it will be really satisfying and exciting moving forwards. An OCD trial, I think David Erritzoe might tell you about that. Again, another exciting new trial moving things forward for a very debilitating disorder. And we've also found quite compelling evidence for improvements in psychological well-being in our research, both on a large level, hundreds of people doing surveys, but also in controlled research. We recently completed a control study in 30 people that showed very substantial, very robust improvements in psychological well-being after their first ever experience with psilocybin, and we controlled for everything with a placebo control in that arm. And also trial design, coming up with innovative ways to test psilocybin therapy that can extend on what we're learning from perhaps the more traditional types of clinical trial. So we're doing a lot, and you'll hear a little bit more from the others about the richness of our research program, particularly in mental health. In terms of neuroscience, that healthy volunteer study is one that's really exciting us. We got some great findings. This isn't an education talk, but some other time tune in because we're really discovering some new ground from that research carried out in the last couple of years with the funding that came in for the founding of the center. And we're so excited that we'll shoot high. We'll shoot for potential publication in the journal Science, one of the most prestigious scientific journals. One of the findings that's especially exciting us is structural changes in the brain that we're seeing after the psilocybin. And these are changes that look healthy. They're the opposite of what you would see in an aging brain, for example, or with neurodegenerative disorders like dementia. So really exciting finding there, and that's why we're shooting so high. We also have the exciting prospect of publishing in Nature Medicine. We're in an advanced stage of review there with our fMRI work linked to our depression trial. Chris Timmerman has been pioneering our DMT research and is close to submitting. We'll again shoot high, Nature Neuroscience, for his study report on a novel combination. It's never been done before with a psychedelic drug, combining EEG and fMRI and looking in the brain with those two complementary modalities to look at different changes in brain activity with that fascinating, potent psychedelic compound. And more recently, with the very generous and vital support from Anton Bilton in particular, we are doing some really pioneering research. I was fortunate to sit in on I think the first substantial dosing session and to witness that. And it was really a glimpse of the future, this continuous infusion protocol, a way of giving DMT that gives the doctor administering the drug a lot of control about when to increase the intensity of the experience and dial it down as well for, say, safety reasons. So really exciting to be doing that work. And I think it's fair to say we put out some informative and hopefully useful models of how psychedelics alter brain function and how that can teach us new things about the nature of consciousness and brain function. So moving on to social science, the last domain that we focused on, some of the exciting work that we're doing there is looking at conflict resolution. So Lior Roseman has done a fantastic study and is also beginning a new one, looking at geopolitical conflict, specifically in the Middle East. And he's put out a report recently on observational research that he's done in that context, people drinking the psychedelic brew ayahuasca and then finding sentiments of reconciliation between Palestinians and Israeli Jews in that ceremonial context. So incredible, and you can imagine if we were to get signal in a space like that, how that would have implications for other potential uses of psychedelics for purposes of conflict resolution, whether it's, say, romantic partners or geopolitical conflict. So very exciting work. Also looking at improvements, increases in nature connectedness, another major issue of our times, of course, ecological considerations, the environment, and we're seeing increases in pro-environmental values, for example, through psychedelic use in different studies, control studies, and also our observational research that we do quite nicely. And related to that, group psychology, an experience that is referred to as communitas, a sense of shared humanity that people have, particularly when psychedelics are taken in a group context. This is something we've seen very clearly and robustly in our research, and it seems to be a mediator of long-term outcomes. And actually, those long-term outcomes look potentially even better in these group contexts, these ceremonial contexts in which psychedelic medicines are taken. Chris Timmerman, again, has done some really interesting work looking at changes in philosophical beliefs in relation to psychedelic use. And Meg and others in the team have started to do some really nice and important work into the ethics of psychedelic use, things around representation, diversity, and different stakeholders there, different players in the space. She might refer to that, I'm not sure, but really proud to be doing that work as well. And changes in personality as well. David Erritzoe has done some really nice work there. So you can see we've got a broad program. We've only been going formally as a centre for a couple of years, but I think it's fair to say our program is very rich, and we're having quite an impact. So now's the time to reflect on how fortunate we are to have this centre, and it's only been made possible by the philanthropic support that came in from our founding donors and those who've supported us since. Now, philanthropy gives a scientist like me, a really fortunate kind of freedom to do what you want to do when you're a scientist, which is to inquire with freedom, to explore. And it's so hard to get that kind of support. If it comes from other routes, say a commercial route, then there's an agenda, there's a commercial agenda, and you get channeled in that way. Or, a mainstream funding body, you kind of dilute it down, water it down, grantmanship to try and win your grant. But with philanthropy, you can be really explorative. You can be a pure inquirer. And it's because of that we can, I think, keep our science fresh, original, novel, groundbreaking. So it can't be emphasized strongly enough how important philanthropic support is for science. And just to, reflect right now on our gratitude for the support that's come in for our centre. Now, I don't need to hover on this point because you're going to hear it in a moment, but the future is really bright for the centre. For example, the Cyprus Clinic, this research clinic that David Erritzoe is directing, is especially exciting. I am moving. It's quite close. I'm moving to UCSF, and that's exciting and opens up new possibilities for me, but there is continuity. And some of my best friends are at Imperial, and they're colleagues and friends, and we plan, and I'm sure we're going to keep collaborating into the future. And there's also some early discussions about formalizing an alliance between the institutions. So I really hope that happens, and I think it will strengthen us both. So I'll end there, and I'll introduce you, if it's okay, to Meg Spriggs. Now, Meg is a superstar. I'm going to close my slides down. She's one of our proudest signings. We signed her from the University of Auckland, where she did her PhD with one of our collaborators, an early collaborator when we used to do our brain imaging down in Cardiff, Suresh Muthu Kumaraswamy. And he was Meg's supervisor, and we're so lucky to have Meg. She really is a phenomenon, and I won't embarrass her too much. I'll just let her do her thing. So thank you all for tuning in, and take it away, Meg.
Oh, shucks. Thanks. Thanks, Robin, for that lovely introduction, and thank you everyone for attending today. So I have the very exciting job of telling you a little bit about our new trial looking at psilocybin-assisted therapy for anorexia nervosa. But just before I get into the details, just a bit of background. So anorexia is a condition defined by a restriction of caloric intake leading to low body weight, a significant fear of weight recovery, and disturbances in the way one experiences their own body shape and weight. And in my opinion, it's one of the most, still one of the most widely misunderstood psychiatric conditions. What a lot of people don't realize is that anorexia is the most fatal of all psychiatric conditions. There are currently no approved pharmacological treatments. And the treatments that we do have are not very effective for a lot of people. So fewer than half of those diagnosed with anorexia reach remission after specialist treatment. And at this point in time, it's really important that we're having these conversations because there are increased rates of anorexia in the COVID-19 pandemic. There have been a few high-profile cases in the media recently of anorexia nervosa. And in the UK here, we have a government that's introducing some guidelines about tackling obesity, things like adding calorie contents onto menus that can have dire consequences for anyone in recovery from an eating disorder or living with an eating disorder. So as I say, it's really important that we're having these conversations and spreading awareness about anorexia, and that we're exploring new treatment avenues, which I think is an absolute imperative. So I'm really excited to be part of this trial looking at psilocybin as a treatment for anorexia nervosa. So this is a unique trial this is the first trial of its kind in the UK and Europe. And there are two overarching aims of the study. So the first is to assess feasibility and possible efficacy of treating anorexia nervosa with psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. And the second is to determine the neuronal mechanisms involved in this treatment for anorexia. So for this study, we'll be recruiting 20 volunteers. So we're looking for females who've had a diagnosis of anorexia nervosa for 3 years or more, and who have found other treatments ineffective. All participants in our study will attend 8 study visits over a 6-week period at Imperial College London. In that time, they will receive 3 doses of psilocybin in a therapeutic context. So that means in the presence of 2 trained guides in a therapeutic environment and enveloped by psychological preparation and integration before and after the dosing sessions. To explore those neuronal mechanisms, all participants will also take part in 2 MRI scans at the beginning and end of the trial, and 5 EEGs across the study period. There's a 12-month follow-up period, with the most intensive follow-up being in the 6 months immediately following completion of the study visits. So we have quite a number of different outcome measures that we're interested in. 2 of the primary outcomes are, of course, psychopathology. This is a clinical trial, so we're interested in changes in eating disorder cognitions and behaviors. However, recognizing that these take time to shift, we're really interested in that over the 6-month follow-up period following completion of the trial. But over the course of that 6-week trial period, what we're interested in exploring is changes in readiness and motivation to recover. We know that a motivation to engage in the recovery process is one of the biggest barriers to recovery. And so what we'd like to explore is whether that sort of changes in that 6-week trial period. And I have the absolute pleasure of being able to say now that we have now started. So we started recruitment for this study in April, and as of this month, we are now running. We have the most amazing clinical team on the ground who are working incredibly hard to get this trial going. And I'm so excited to see what the next couple of years brings, and to report back to you in a couple of years' time with some results. So if there's anybody who would like to know more about eligibility and recruitment, I invite you to check out our website. You'll find all of the relevant information there. I'd like to say thank you to the clinical team running the study, and also a special thank you to the funders, particularly Sanjay and the Nikian Foundation, for making this trial possible. And with that, I won't go on any longer. I will pass back to David Nutt, who's going to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Meg. And it's good to get you from the other side of the world. The challenge now is to keep you. But we're working on that. Before I just want to introduce the next speaker, which is David Erritzoe. But I just want to preface it by saying that essentially concur with what Robin said. Philanthropy has been central to the success of the center. It helped us start at the psychedelic work. It helped us continue it and to do the trials. And it's not that we haven't tried to get money from government, but it's been very difficult because what we're doing, we're breaking the boundaries of conventional research, and also particularly psychopharmacology. So we should take credit in that, and hopefully the UK will catch up. Other countries are. We discovered Australia now has a separate fund for academic research with psychedelics, but the UK at present hasn't had the foresight to develop that. But I think because of the success of the centre, and particularly Robin's work, we've managed to persuade Imperial College that they should do some investing in it as well. And the next talk is from David Erritzoe, who is another star that we've managed to recruit. He's a rather uniquely trained psychiatrist. He's also a brilliant brain imager, but also a great neuroscientist. And we've stolen him from both Columbia in New York and from Copenhagen. And he's now going to head up this very exciting new centre, which will be only the second clinical centre for psychedelic research in the UK. So over to you, David.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for attending. Let me just share the slides. And before diving into some of the science, I'll just also express my gratitude to the funders that made it possible for us to start the center and to get it going and to run all these exciting studies that we are running. And also my gratitude particularly towards Robin, that have been, incredible to have such a close collaboration. It sounds like I'm a new signing, but I have actually been working alongside the team, David and Robin, for 12 years now, and have enjoyed every moment of it. And I'm sure, as Robin also said, the continuity, we are very close, and we are very closely collaborating also across some of the work that you'll be seeing me introduce here, and I'm also involved in what Robin was talking about before. So, and we will continue to work really closely together, I'm sure. So I will expand a bit to some of the line of work we are doing that you might have heard less about, the people who are directly following the psychedelic and maybe even being involved in making it happen. That we also are doing other things, and some of the imaging modalities that we have also in our program is molecular brain imaging. So basically, when we hear a lot about the results from the trials that Robin are talking about and presenting, it's functional MRI and it's EEG, and those are great, but they're not very specific, selective. We don't really, they show activation, deactivation in the brain, but the actual pharmacology, the molecular basis, what is actually driving it, what system is involved, what transmitter system is involved, what receptors and so on. The only way to understand that is through molecular brain imaging, and the imaging technique is called PET. And we are doing that kind of imaging, particularly in the serotonin system and the dopamine system. We've also been doing in the GABA system and in the opiate system, but I'm focusing a bit on the serotonin and dopamine system. And the serotonin system is, of course, incredibly important for depression, anxiety, and so on. So what we call the affective disorders, and the dopamine in the reward circuits involved in some of the dysfunction related to addictions. And we can use these technologies to measure receptors and transporters, and also release of transmitters. We can actually measure the transmitters. The only way to measure these molecules in the living human brain. And that has worked well for dopamine through what we call the competition model, where we do brain imaging with some PET targeting ligands in the brain. And then we do a challenge with a pharmacological agent such as amphetamine that release dopamine. And then we can do another scan, and then we can subtract the two scans, and thereby we can assess the release of dopamine. However, that has not worked in this system, the serotonin system, which is a really important system. That's also where the psychedelics work. It's where the antidepressants work. It is the system very important for regulation of mood and so on. And we then took knowledge from the dopamine system, where we know that specific characteristics of these PET radioligands, that if they have specific properties, then they are more likely to work in these competition models. So we got inspiration from that, and then in the Copenhagen team, they help develop new compounds and have basically been driving this forward. That's where I did my PhD and came over here. In the meantime, they developed these ligands, and then now we're using them. So basically, a lot of ligands have not worked. I won't go into detail, but the SYMP36 compound, which basically is a psychedelic, it's a serotonin 2A receptor stimulating compound. So when we radio label it, and we give it in a tiny, tiny dose, we can label these receptors, the psychedelic receptors in the serotonin system, and they are sensitive to changes in the synaptic levels of serotonin that are following a challenge with amphetamine. So we showed that using this new radioligand combined with amphetamine actually turned out to be a successful method for the first time in the living human brain to actually measure serotonin levels or release of it. And then we have done preliminary work in depression. It's quite an obvious sort of target for testing this method. And we can see that compared to the healthy control, the patients then they release less serotonin. And actually, the more depressed, the less they release, which supports the 50-year-old plus hypothesis of depression. And what we are interested in doing is to expand that line of work. That is not directly psychedelic, but it kind of is, because it can be used to predict treatment. That we would like to test whether it could, because we don't understand why some people do and other people don't really respond to treatments for depression. And so the idea would be to expand the line of work to see, measure these things before we start treating, and then try to see if we can predict who responds based on these measures. Both with various serotonergic medications such as SSRIs, but also with psychedelics. Then one of the things that we are also very interested in using multimodal imaging, basically different kinds of imaging that together can inform more than one of them alone. So additive information coming from combining them. So the functional imaging, we can, for instance, use emotional phases. We know it's very sensitive to levels in the brain of serotonin, and then we can combine it with PET and understand how those two relate, because the PET, as I mentioned, gives you the actual pharmacological understanding what's happening in the brain. And then we can potentially use these fMRI methods as surrogate markers of the more molecular aspects, and thereby understand more of the conditions. And we are using these phase paradigms also in multiple of the trials that Robin was referring to earlier. Then in the dopamine system, we are developing fMRI, different kind of tasks that are targeting the reward circuits of the brain. And we are currently testing that in a gambling study. So together with the National Problem Gambling Clinic, we are doing a gambling study without any psychedelic intervention in the first round, because we are only funded to do a pilot study where we basically test these and validate the methods in gamblers and in controls. And the idea is that in addiction, basically your reward system is hijacked by your addiction. So basically you lose the ability to fully appreciate, live your life to the fullest and appreciate natural rewards and engage in normal activities and enjoy social connection and activities that you used to before you developed your addiction. So that is the kind of things that we are going to explore the brain mechanisms behind in this trial. But the ultimate scope is to take these paradigms from fMRI further and combine them with PET in order to actually also understand the molecular basis for it. And when it comes to the different video cues we are testing, where we can start testing some of the things where you also see in the psychedelic work that people become more social connected, more nature related, and so on. We would like to understand the biological basis. It will inform us about how these new treatments work and about the conditions that we are looking at. So it would be obvious to take this further and test some of these paradigms before and after treating with psychedelics. As you know, they are very promising. Robin also already talked about it. You also know a lot of our work. And they, in addition to be therapeutically valuable, they also increase openness, cognitive flexibility, nature relatedness, social connectedness, as I mentioned, based on some of this work here. But one of the things is a lot of these things, we just use questionnaires and tasks. But what about the brain? We don't really fully understand that. So it would be interesting to apply some of these imaging techniques to actually understand the neuroscience behind it. And so that's part of the program that we are rolling out, that we are would like to see whether we can induce a rebroadening of a sort of narrowed hijack reward system by testing some of these tasks with combined brain imaging, both EEG, some of it actually developed by Meg and her team in Auckland and brought to us. We are implementing that in a lot of our trials. The EEG methods from that team, they are highly interesting and can measure neuroplasticity. And we have even more fancy tools now. We have new tracers. Only very few sensors on the planet can use have access to this new method where we can actually measure neuroplasticity molecularly in the synapses with a new PET tracer. So we are going to test that. So I already mentioned the gambling, and I also mentioned that we would like to do more where we dive into before and after psychedelic treatments with some of these molecular and functional and structural brain imaging techniques in combination before and after psychedelic intervention. And when it comes to this new UCBJ synaptogenesis or neuroplasticity measure, we have funding to do a ketamine study with infusion, which we are going to do in this new Cyprus clinic. And then we would like to do the same thing following a psychedelic. That would be incredibly important and basically be the human version of what David Olson and his team and other centers on the planet have been shown preclinically. So in animal models and so on, we could test some of that with this new package of imaging combinations in humans. So we're going to start with ketamine and hope to get some support, financial support to do it with psychedelics as well. We're also doing microdosing work. We already published recently in eLife interesting work together with Balazs Shigeti, who developed this wonderful self-blinding method so we can test naturalistic psychedelic microdosing. We're going to do that in the lab in London with some of the plasticity EEG measures. And also, as Robin also mentioned, we're doing an OCD study. We're also going to test EEG plasticity measures and cognitive flexibility. So now to what Robin mentioned, the Cyprus Clinic. So as you can see, it stands for CNWL, which is the NHS Foundation Trust, where I work clinically as a psychiatrist. Now my role is basically to bring in the research and set that up in this new clinic. So they kindly and generously offered the whole space for us, and they moved the ECT treatment to another hospital. So now we have a dedicated space at St. Charles Hospital. So now, in addition to the center, we now have a sister clinic where we hope to also get support because right now it looks a bit like something NHS service from the 80s. We would like to transform it into a model clinic for the future where we can test these new treatments, even in group sessions, because the rooms allow for that if we do some modifications, which is amazing. So it opens tons of opportunities for us. We have never had our own dedicated space. Suddenly we have it, and we have it in a Mental Health NHS Foundation Trust, who even kindly supported us so we can hire a lab manager for the first year. But still, we need further funds in order to make this going. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and there'll be we can answer questions later. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. Thank you very much.
David, and just to point out that he didn't mention the map. It's only it's 5 minute cycle ride, which apparently is the way every young person gets around London now. Just 5 minute cycle ride from the centre. So extremely fortunate to have a clinic in the NHS.
Google Maps says it takes 11 minutes in a car, but it seriously takes 5 minutes on a bicycle. But that's London for you. Yeah.
So, well, we've bombarded you with lots of exciting ideas. I'm going to ask you all now to think of the questions, put your questions in the Q&A, and while you're doing that, and we're organising the questions, we're going to show you a video about the centre. So can we run the video now, please?
Understanding consciousness is the major frontier of our age. So what if we had a paradigm-shifting tool right here in our hands?
Imperial College London are proud to announce the founding of a new Centre for Psychedelic Research.
Imperial's commitment to this centre reflects an unprecedented level of institutional support for psychedelic science, symbolic of its now mainstream appeal.
Psychedelics are set to have a large impact on science and psychiatry in the coming decade. Building on 10 years of experience at the vanguard of psychedelic science, our centre will focus on 3 complementary areas: mental health, neuroscience, and social science.
The founding of this centre has been made possible by a number of very generous donations. Our 10-year vision includes a clinical trial comparing psilocybin therapy with a conventional drug treatment for depression.
A new study of psilocybin therapy for anorexia.
Brain imaging research with DMT.
Studies into microdosing and group ceremonies with psychedelics.
Studies into the long-term brain effects of psychedelics in first-time users. And the founding of a brand new research clinic for psilocybin therapy. We intend for this clinic to serve as a prototype and inspiration for the licensed psychedelic care facilities of the future.
With it, we hope to examine the potential of psilocybin therapy to treat a broad range of conditions, thus helping to build a richer evidence base for psychedelic medicine, which could ultimately enable a broader cross-section of people to benefit.
Here at the Centre for Psychedelic Research, we are passionate about improving mental health care at a time when this is so desperately needed.
We are committed to bold, high-quality science,
and hopeful of bringing a deeper, more human and holistic quality of care to those who suffer.
Well, that's the ambition, and I think you can see that we've already made quite a lot of progress, and we will continue to do so in future, provided we can maintain the same level of funding. So again, thanks to those who've made that possible. So we have some questions now. A couple of questions, Robin, about your app, the Mydelica. Do you want to clarify a little bit more about what the app is and how you'll use it?
Sure. So the app Mydelica, you can check out the initial website, mydelica.com. And it evolved out of research that we've been doing for about 5 years, observational, naturalistic research, tracking people essentially before and after planned psychedelic use. And we've done that for a range of different types of psychedelic use, whether it's at ayahuasca retreats in the Amazon to microdosing and going off to work or what have you. And so it's yielded this very rich database. And, you know, I sometimes say these days, where we are right now is kind of the Wild West. You know, there's a lot of people taking psychedelics, self-medicating with psychedelics. And while these are interesting and exciting times, that presents some risk because people might sometimes be taking psychedelics in a way that isn't consistent with how we do our therapeutic research. So part of the motivation with the app is to borrow from our learnings doing this observational research, these deep data sets, and in an evidence-based way inform on harm reduction messaging. So we've got a lot of video material in the app. The app's launching later this year, around about September, that advise people on how to keep themselves safe, essentially. And added to that, the other big aspect of the functionality is that we're big believers in the centre in citizen science. So rather than using people as guinea pigs, so to speak, we try and engage them in the scientific process. And we've done that through a lot of nice different techniques. But one way we can do that is to give people back their data, to chart it back to them and then tell them what it means. For example, in relation to other people, other populations, and also where they've come from in terms of their trajectory. So those are the two main functions. And then there's 1,000,001 other possibilities for cool things like integrating VR and a lot of different ideas for the future, but that's the basics of it for launch. Oh, you're on mute, David.
David Erritzoe, about microdosing. You said you're going to be doing a microdosing study in Cyprus Clinic. Can you elaborate a bit on that, please?
Yeah, so microdosing is first of all, it's appealing to study because it's so incredibly widespread and popular, really sort of almost pop cultural phenomenon. People sort of feel belonging to a new thing. It's a bit sort of against the establishment to choose to microdose, either to improve, enhance your cognitive performance, memory, creativity, and so on. So it's extremely popular. However, the evidence for whether it works, with basically it is taking 5 to 10% of full doses in a repeated manner, a couple of times a week, typically. And there's tons of sort of weak evidence in terms of reports, anecdotes, even prospective studies without a control condition, where people follow people from before they start, maybe through a big online survey. We have done that. Others have done that. It looks amazing. People improve in everything you can. However, when we then try to do it a bit more sort of stringent scientifically by introducing a control condition, basically, Balázs Szigethy, he developed this manual that allowed people to blind themselves with their own compound. So basically, people could, make a placebo version. They didn't know. We had QR codes that was attached to the different envelopes with the drugs. Then they were scanned in from people through an app, and then we could see what people have been taking. When we analyze that data, and that's what I referred to, published in eLife, we can see that the expectations of the effects are really driving a lot of the effects. And that means there's a massive placebo component, apparently, in the actions of psychedelics. So we want to understand it more. We want to try to close some of the scientific gaps. Obviously, in that global survey thing with the self-blinding, we couldn't monitor, check what was in the compounds that people use to microdose. There are different things we would like to do in order to, understand it even more and do some neuroscience on these low doses in a controlled manner. So it will be a lab-based study, so in the Cyprus Clinic in London, and it will be for London-based participants. And we are going to use some of Meg's paradigms, looking at plasticity. We're going to try to test the compounds and do different neuropsych testing also related to creativity. We're also going to measure some things in the bloods related to plasticity, and we are going to monitor heart rate variability, which is something related to mental health components such as stress and also sleep quality through some of these sort of apps that are things that people can wear on the wrist. So that's the kind of work we are planning for microdosing, which is basically an extension of what we recently published.
Now, there's a very technical question by someone who obviously knows a huge amount about anorexia nervosa, called Matthew. And he's pointed out that there's a lot of research on serotonin in anorexia nervosa, which doesn't necessarily make sense with why one might use psychedelics. And I haven't got time to go into it in detail. I think the key thing here is you should read the paper that Robin and I wrote a couple of years ago in the Journal of Psychopharmacology. It's called A Tale of Two Receptors. And it re-illustrates the fact that psychedelics work in a very, very different way to SSRIs, not just in a different way, but also in different parts of the brain. And it's, even though you might find paradoxical changes in serotonin, which in disorders, which suggest that actually there's an increase, that may not be therapeutic because it isn't targeting the right parts of the brain. And very simply, the reason we're doing a psilocybin trial in anorexia is to disrupt the negative thinking, the self-referential, critical thinking, and the distorted thinking about body weight. We think that psychedelics will work on a range of internalizing disorders, not just depression. Anorexia is an internalizing disorder, so is OCD. People get stuck into thinking loops, which are cortically driven, from which they can't escape, which they often resist, but they can't break free from. And psychedelics can do that in a way that antidepressants can't, and they do it through a very different process. So read that paper in the Journal of Psychopharmacology 2 years ago, Nutt and Carhart-Harris and Nutt, A Tale of Two Receptors. That'll clarify the distinctions. Now, this is a very important question, which we do have some data on, and I'm going to go back to Robin for this, which is about psychedelics in people with personality disorders. The question says, it's from someone called Mike Rigby, NHS psychotherapy services are almost predominantly treating people with personality disorders. Is there a role for psychedelics there, do you think?
Well, there's a paper written on the topic by Rick Seifman, who's a very bright, young, training clinical psychologist that we collaborate with very closely. Now, we do have some data that suggests it's particularly difficult to treat borderline personality disorder with a psychedelic. So our naturalistic observational data says that the outcomes don't look actually as good. There's perhaps added risk in looking in that disorder with a psychedelic when people self-medicate. Now, I think what that suggests to us that if people are to attempt that, then maybe a different model is needed, maybe more extensive psychotherapy, maybe even a different compound than psilocybin, perhaps something like MDMA that is sometimes described as a heart opener that promotes social connectedness and empathy. So we don't know until we test, but I would recommend that Zeifman paper, Zeifman, and just to say that we've got some data that we're working on analyzing and writing up, which suggests that actually if you just were to go at borderline personality disorder and take a psychedelic, there could be added risk actually. So caution right there.
Yeah, and that's a great example of how your naturalistic studies can inform questions in the NHS, which will probably not be studied within the NHS for decades. So it's a very good example of why you're having this broad approach, this multi-stringed approach is very helpful. Now, a question for David here about. Do you need a peak experience? Do you need to have a psychedelic experience, or these reports that you can treat depression in mice with non-psychedelic 5-HT2A sort of drugs? Do you think they're going to work clinically, or where do you stand on the need for an experience?
I think it's an incredibly interesting and important question, and it's hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of data, including from us and from others, that can see correlational relationships between the profoundness of these sort of peak experiences and the later outcomes. But are they causal, or are they just correlations? Could it be that it's not completely needed? And you're right, some of the animal work is suggesting otherwise, that maybe sort of stimulating the 2A without having a psychedelic experience as part of it. Although, I mean, obviously a psychedelic experience in the mouse might be slightly different, and they're measuring that from head twitch and not through asking them to rate on altered state of consciousness kind of questionnaire, these little rodents. But it's worth testing, because obviously it's we don't know, and it will be a long path to test it, because obviously in these new compounds that will be developed by different people stepping into the space who think, okay, here we have some drugs that stimulate this receptor, which is true, the psychedelics. But hey, what about we can get rid of all the actual subjective experience and just stimulate the receptor without that? That will be tested. It's going to take a long time, because they need to go through all the early work and safety. So it will take years for them to probably be possible to test in humans. Also, what I would also say, and this is not to sort of ditch preclinical animal work, but there is a high failure rate going from early work in animal models when it comes to mental health, depression treatments. There's a lot of treatments that simply don't translate into the humans. So I'm not saying that it's not worth testing. It is, but my position in this is that it's interesting, but the jury is out. It really looks like the nature of these experiences are important, and there is sort of an experiential component to how these drugs produce their magic.
And one final question then for Meg. People want to understand how the EEG measures plasticity.
Oh, wow. Well, that would be a whole another talk. So there are a few different ways that we can use EEG to measure plasticity. One is using the visual LTP paradigm that was developed by my collaborators in Auckland, my old supervisor, Ian Kirk and Suresh Mujakumaraswamy and others. And it's a visually induced paradigm. And I won't go into the technical details here, but we recently published a review paper of this, myself and Rachel Sumner, who's been pioneering this work as well, published a review paper of how we can use the visual LTP paradigm. So Sumner, Spriggs et al. 2020. I recommend you look at that. And then there's other measures such as the roving mismatch negativity paradigm, which I did some work a few years ago with Chris Timmerman, actually, looking at using the mismatch negativity as a measure of plasticity in the acute LSD state. So that's another paper that you can check out, Timmerman.
That's enough. That's 2 answers is good enough.
Sorry.
Right. So we've got a couple of minutes. That's fine. The point is you've done it and you validated it, and you can get reliable results, which is and the great thing about EEG is it's way less expensive than PET and MRI, and you can do it in the real world. You don't have to put people in a tube in a washing machine, do you? So we're going to have to wind up now. We've got loads more questions. If we won't be able to answer them, but if you want to write them into the centre, then people will respond to them. There are questions relating to how you can refer yourself for trials. Can you be an intern? Can you help out in any way? And so if you write in, we'll do our very best to respond to them. But can I have the final slides now? Because I just need to sum up, or rather close down and thank people. Particularly, again, the thanks to the founding donors, Anton Bilton, Shamil Chandaria, Tim Ferris, who can't be with us today, but I hope someone from his institution is here, the Nikayam Foundation, the Tamas family. It's been really wonderful to have such a fast, immediate, and high-quality support. And I think we've shown that with it, the Psychedelic Research Centre has really proven its ability to do the kind of work that you wanted us to do. And thanks to all of you. Well over 100 people joined. The ones who've answered the questions mostly have said how impressed they've been. If you've been impressed and if you'd like to support the work, then just make a note of this email, Amy Propsting at Imperial. We would be delighted to hear from any of you who want to support us in any way. And it doesn't matter whether it's a lot or a little, all contributions are put to a good cause, and will definitely support the future of this, not just this very exciting research center, but also this enormously exciting branch of medicine. This is one of the great revolutions in medicine. We're privileged to be at the start of it, and I hope you can join us in the rest of the journey. Thank you very much.